Welcome to this week's notes. We got Eastern Europe and Japan. We're going to start with Eastern Europe, especially the Soviet Union. As the leader of the communist part of the world, the Soviet Union became the second most powerful nation on Earth. However, unlike the USA, where we had a really good 1950s and 60s, the average Soviet citizen's life did not actually improve because of their power. So you're going to get people like Joseph Stalin die off from World War II era, and that leads to a new Soviet Union. It's no longer going to be as bad as it was during the Stalin times, where he killed more people than Hitler actually did. Okay. The first person that took over after him was Nikita Khrushchev. He used to be a military leader during World War II, and then he was the one who was able to successfully become the new leader of the Soviet Union. He actually shocked a lot of people because he criticized many of Stalin's ideas, and he wanted a bit more freedom in the Soviet Union. But when you go from zero to a small amount of freedom, it's a big difference. Okay. It did not apply to other countries, though. Nikita Khrushchev did not allow Hungary to decide their own fate. In 1956, they tried to overthrow their communist government. The Soviets then sent the tanks in, and they stopped the Hungarian rebels from starting a country that they actually wanted. Okay. In 1961, the United States tried to invade the communist Cuban government. We sent former Cubans who were living in Miami and South Florida. We sent them so that it would look like it wasn't an American invasion. However, that completely failed. We did not give them any planes to do this, just boats and guns. The leader of Cuba at the time, Fidel Castro, asked for Soviet help in whatever way they could help him out. The Soviets then decided to send ICBMs, nuclear missiles, to Cuba, and it could have put nukes within 100 miles of Florida. So this is the type of system where if the Soviet Union decided to nuke us, there would have been no chance at stopping it. There would have been no warning, because when you're 100 miles away and you're using missiles, it gets there very, very quickly. After a very intense blockade where we surrounded the island to stop the Soviets to go there anymore, the Soviets agreed to pull out their nukes and their missiles from Cuba, but only because America agreed to remove their own nukes from Turkey, and that was more of a secret. So it looked like the Americans actually won that conflict. Okay, move on to Brezhnev. For 18 years, we got Leonid Brezhnev from 64 to 82. So the thing with the Soviet Union is you get a lot of these leaders last quite a while. Brezhnev brought back many of the harsher policies of Stalin, and the Soviet Union became more of a police state. Not that it wasn't under Khrushchev, it just got a little bit more harsher again. He also believed in messing with other countries as much as he could. The Soviet Union funded many communist groups and countries. For the best example we have is they helped the Viet Cong fight the Americans. That way they could weaken us in the 1970s. Okay, some military mistakes that they made. Under Brezhnev, the Soviet Union dramatically increased their military spending and believed they could invade and intervene in any country that was part of Eastern Europe in that Warsaw Pact. Okay. Over time, the United States economy was much better than the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union had to spend larger percentages of its wealth just to keep up with the United States' military. So we would have the same size military, perhaps, but the Soviet Union might be spending 2 to 3 times more as a percentage of their economy. In 1979, we have the Soviet Union decided that they should invade Afghanistan, which turned into a disaster because the Americans gave the Afghanis shoulder-mounted rocket launchers that could shoot down helicopters, and Afghanistan's already a really hard place to control anyway. So when you give the Afghanis American technology, there was no way the Soviets could have ever controlled the country entirely. And you will see on this corner the economy of the Soviet Union and America just started to get larger and larger in the differences, and you get to the point where in the late 1980s it actually starts to dip downwards because the economy stops working for them. That's why they collapse. So we get Gorbachev. He became the leader of the Soviet Union after the Soviet Union had about 3 or 4 leaders in a 3-year time period. He became their new leader. He was the young guy of all the leaders, born in 1931. He was the first and only leader to ever be born in the Soviet Union. The other ones had been born during the Russian Empire. He allowed more freedom of the press and allowed some capitalist measures to save the economy, 2 things that he thought our country won't collapse, but we will be able to get through everything if we just allow a little bit more freedom. The problem was that just steamrolled all that success for the anti-communists. People started to know how bad their country was in comparison to other countries. That led to the breakup of the Soviet Union. They also realized how poor they were compared to the United States, and things just started to collapse. There just wouldn't be bread on the shelves. You wouldn't have a good job. You might have a doctor and a janitor making the same amount of money because they all worked for the university and everybody was all equal. Well, it doesn't always work out when you don't give the right amount of money to the right amount of people, you put the right amount of money into the right industries. They couldn't handle that transition and the whole country split up. Boris Yeltsin was the first president of Russia, and he was one of the people that presided over the chaos of Russia when it restructured. He became one of the leaders. He was the leader of Moscow, I believe, of St. Petersburg, and he then was able to take that power and help to reorganize Russia. In 1999, after about 5 to 6 years of being president, he resigned himself because he wasn't doing a great job of stopping some rebels in southern Russia, and that allowed his number 2 guy, Vladimir Putin, to become president. And then Vladimir Putin has been basically president in one way or another since 1999. There was a rule in the Russian democracy that you can only run for 8 years before you had to be removed. So he did that. He allowed his number 2 guy, Dmitry Medvedev, to be president for 4 years. But in the background, Vladimir Putin was making all the decisions. He today runs a pseudo-dictatorship where Russians have some freedoms, but he's unlikely to ever leave power. He's also consolidated some businesses underneath himself. So in some ways, some people think he could be the richest man in the world. It's just that he doesn't always run stuff in his own name. Okay, some new nations. As the Soviet Union collapsed, 15 new nations were created. Many other nations overthrew their communist dictatorships and reconnected with the rest of Europe. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, many of the old Warsaw Pact joined NATO and the EU, so they were no longer even pro-Russian at all. So we'll look at Poland. Home of Pope John Paul II, Poland had the best success in removing Soviet presence. In 1979, John Paul II went to Poland. He even criticized the communists in that country, and he met with Polish anti-communists to give them more support. By 1989, the Polish group Solidarity, which was the name of the group, they were the strongest force in the country, and they were actually able to win the first elections in the country in over 40 years, or over 50 years. It was a very big deal. Having Pope John Paul II helped to bring that feeling back to Poland of, hey, we can be a country again. It's a very, very Catholic country. Today it is very conservative instead of the more liberal communism, and it's over 90% Catholic. So it's very conservative Catholic in that country. Okay, and lastly we'll look at Japan. After World War II, Japan was occupied by America and turned into a democracy. The Japanese economy grew so rapidly that it became the second largest economy in the world, and was only passed by the Chinese in 2010. And then Japan also got really good at businesses. They specialize in car production, so if you think of Toyota cars, really small cars that get really good gas mileage. And the other high-tech industries they got into were computers and some other telecommunications. So if you think of like PlayStation as a console, video game console that they created, they also have like Nintendo, they have Pokemon, they have anime, they have all these great things. Japan is also today near the top of every category. So they have great life expectancy in that country. I think you're expected to get to your 79 to 80, and that's like an average person. They're also very good in wealth. They're a very wealthy country as well.